Aloha, spooky nerds. Aaron Sagers here, journalist, host, researcher of all things, and also currently seen on Travel Channel and Discovery Plus's Paranormal Caught on Camera. And this right here is a paranormal pop culture show that we are calling Talking Strange. And this is part of the Den of Geek.com network. Do you like scary movies? It is a catchphrase from Scream, one of the most famous horror movie franchises of all time. But what you may not know, or maybe you do, you guys are a smart crowd, is that the real fright behind Scream lies in its true crime roots. Really horrific story of a serial killer known as the Gainesville Ripper. His real name is Danny Rawling. And beginning in 1989, he stalked and murdered 8 victims in Shreveport, Louisiana, and Gainesville, Florida. This included 5 college students. And I have to say, I distinctly remember this case because I grew up in Central Florida, and I distinctly remember this as a little kid, this case. He was eventually convicted. He was executed in 2006. And that brings us to Scream, the True Story, the 2-hour shock doc streaming now on Discovery Plus. Now, in this shock doc, paranormal investigator Steve Shippy joins forces with psychic medium Cindy Kaza to explore a potential paranormal connection with the killer. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Steve. He's actually someone that I've not spoken to before, but word on the street from a lot of people that I respect say that he's not only a nice guy, but he's a really gifted paranormal investigator. And he grew up in a town near Saginaw, Michigan. And as a kid, he was a victim of a severe haunting, which that experience stayed with Steve. And he kind of sought to figure out this paranormal world and work with paranormal investigators who allowed him to develop his own way to grasp a comprehending on what's going on with hauntings and how to confront entities to either make them leave or bring them peace to hopefully end the haunting. Steve Shippy began his work documenting all of this on film, and he's produced, to date, I could be wrong, but 10 feature-length documentaries, produced and directed. Those are all on Amazon Prime. They include A Haunting on Hamilton Street, Haunting on Dice Road, and A Haunting on Broadway Street. So without further ado, let me bring this gentleman into the feed. Steve Shippy, hey, man.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for joining me today. This is such a old person question, but I'm going to ask it. I'm based in Brooklyn. We're getting a little bit of snow. It's kind of a little cold, but how you doing up there in Michigan?
We are freezing.
Okay, yeah. So it's standard Michigan weather then.
Yeah, very cold, snowy, icy.
Yeah. Well, we'll try to keep it nice and warm and toasty environment here. I also apologize in advance. Being in Brooklyn, it means that there's always some noisy environments around me, and there's construction happening right now. So in my building, so I'm gonna have a hot little finger on this mute button. But Steve, well, okay, so I guess let's talk a little bit about the movie Scream before we get into the story behind it. What was your first memory of Scream? And also, when did you learn that writer Kevin Williamson was inspired by these tragic events?
Well, when Scream first came out, the first film, I did go opening night. I did go see it in the theater. I actually loved the film. So that, kind of brings back that memory. I know I've seen the second one. I don't know that I've seen any after that. I don't remember, but the first two stuck with me. I didn't really realize that Scream was based on a true story till maybe about 4 or 5 years ago. I just happened to catch it in one of those scrolling through articles that catch your eye. And so it was kind of interesting that I learned that. And a few years later, this case comes.
Yeah, and yeah, what a case it is. I mean, as the Scream the movie, was definitely a lot of horror, a lot of slasher elements to it, but it also had a little bit of a comedy to it. And this is not present, obviously, in this horrible case. And just for a little bit of a backstory, the story goes that the writer Kevin Williamson, I believe, he was house sitting for a friend while watching a news program about the Gainesville Ripper. and he noticed an open window in the house that he was sitting, and called up his friend, and they began sort of investigating the house, looking all around the house while talking to his friend. So, and also, you guys out in the chat world, hello to Chad, hello to Jackie. Throw your questions in there. So, I guess, kind of the first question is, as a paranormal investigator, how do you approach this topic with fresh eyes, but also, frankly, without appearing to be exploitive about, let's face it, a really horrific crime and tragedy?
Sure. Well, with this case in particular, it was about, for me, it was about many things, but one of the major things were trying to discern whether or not was Danny Rawling truly influenced by some type of darker spirit. Danny didn't make these claims after he was arrested, while the media attention was on him. He was making these claims far before he was caught. At his campsite there, we call it a campsite. It was basically a place that he was hiding and held up in a tent. And then by night he would go stalk his victims. But he would record a series of audio recordings. We, were able to obtain multiple cassette tapes where he was just ranting for hours at a time about this demon named Gemini, as he called it, would come to him, and he would change and be taken over. So, and it's just interesting to wonder. I have a lot of theories on this. This is quite a wormhole for me, but it's, was Danny already under this demonic influence, or did he almost conjure a demonic influence by believing that he was and then committing these murders, thus opening up a gateway for himself to be potentially possessed?
And let me come back to that in a minute. Before we get to that, tell me a little bit about the team that you're working with on this investigation and why they're the right folks for this job.
Yeah, sure. For this investigation, Cindy Kaza and I were paired up to investigate it, and I really believe that this probably was an offshoot, so to speak, of her and I investigating the notorious Ed Gein case. Cindy and I went into, obviously, once again, a very dark case of a notorious killer, very twisted individual, Ed Gein. And I feel that as a result of that investigation, when this case presented itself, probably Cindy and I were a good pair to go back and do something of this caliber, of this nature.
You also work with Catholic priest Michael Salerno, right? And you've
Yes.
worked with him previously?
Yeah, he's a Catholic demonologist. I've worked with him several times now, and I think he's a fantastic person. He truly cares about helping, and he takes it very seriously.
So let's talk a little bit about this Gemini that he references. So so you interview throughout this documentary, you interview Rod Smith. He was a prosecuting attorney for the state of Florida. He was later a senator for the state. What was his take on sort of the demon approach to this, and what Rawling said?
Sure. Personally, I think he made it pretty clear in multiple ways that I don't think he gives any credence to that. I don't know his belief system. For all I know, he could be skeptical of anything paranormal. I'm not sure, but and I see where he's coming from, and I feel that a lot of people didn't want to even listen to what Rawling was saying about this potential demonic influence, because they probably just viewed it as a way where he was trying to deflect responsibility for the disgusting things that he did, which is understandable. I mean, completely understandable. So he didn't really want to talk too much about that. I think he just wanted to make it clear what his thoughts were about Danny, the caliber, the nature of his crimes, and how horrendous they were.
Right. And the reason I bring up Rod is I know that it was an interesting interview throughout the documentary with him. Now, one of the things he said was that he believed, and this was more in the prosecution materials. Rod Smith said that he believed that Rawling was basically making up this Gemini character because he had seen The Exorcist 3, which also includes a character who decapitates his victims named Gemini and is a serial killer and utilizes like words spelled backwards. Rod Smith said that Rawling had only seen The Exorcist a day or two before he began his killing spree, and that he was basically lifting this Gemini character from that movie. And he, I think he is of the mindset that that was just sort of an excuse, but that's not where your mind is at.
Well, it's hard to say exactly that exact reference and what was going through this twisted guy's mind. But, for me, I'm kind of more latching on to and examining, the hundreds of hours of ranting and raving about being consumed by some type of demon. And these were his private recordings. I don't know that he thought he was going to be caught. And he had these tapes kind of hidden away. So I feel that, after listening to them, it did seem authentically to me that he believed that this was happening to him. Then on top of that, you have, I don't know exactly how many drawings, but at least around 50 that I saw, where he's just kind of constantly sketching out what appears to be this kind of meek victim, this kind of creature that approaches, and then you see the evolution of this monster kind of emerging from that. So to me, I mean, clearly the man was he was deranged. Needless to say, he was there was something very wrong with him. But can you discount that there could have been some kind of ominous force around him? And then besides that, with our investigation with Cindy and I, the things that we were experiencing during the investigation sure seemed to point to that as well.
So in his recordings, and I know, yeah, you guys do play those some of those recordings throughout the documentary. So he does, and I apologize if I don't recall. So he does mention specifically this Gemini demon in his private recordings as what, possessing him, stalking him, or
possessing him, taking him over. That this creature would come to him, and when this creature comes to him, it's basically as if he shapeshifts. He doesn't recall anything. He has, time loss, etc. And so he paints that picture with words and with a pencil, with a pen.
Yeah, there's a lot of disturbing imagery from his own artwork.
Yeah.
I'm hesitant to use that word, but his own drawings throughout the documentary. Do you and well, actually, with your Catholic demonologist, does he, throughout his own research, did he find any kind of background to what a Gemini could be, or what kind of like historical links? I mean, is this a so-called demon that we've heard of, encountered before?
Michael and I didn't have that exact conversation. I myself, I have never heard the term Gemini being used for a specific demon name. However, I'm not a demonologist, but fairly well versed in the subject to some degree. I think Michael was looking more for telltale signs of what Cindy and I were experiencing, what was happening around us, what were we picking up on, what were we sensing, and details of the case. I think that when he understood that Cindy and I both were ready to go out on that limb, right, as I like to call it, it's very rare that you want to, I guess, diagnose a situation as demonic. That's not something anybody should be quick to label. But I think that when he understood that her and I both, with both of our vast history of being in this field, he took it very seriously, and we had a lot of conversation about it. And he felt that it was very necessary for him to come there. And then upon him being there, he truly believed that's what we were encountering as well.
I'm on mute. I just want to bring up a couple comments from the audience. Yeah, let's see here. We have Jackie asking if anyone else has heard of this Gemini demon. That's a good question. I think Steve just addressed that. And just interesting from Chad. Wonder if the guy wore a mask or if the mask was influenced by him or Gemini. Kind of speaks to the duality of the Gemini, right? And and you just kind of touched on this, that when you're investigating a case, a paranormal case, we have to, or even, if the authorities are investigating this, there are people that are, let's face it, they are suffering from borderline personality disorder, dissociative identity disorder. There's a lot of mental imbalances that go into things before we ever get to demons. So I just want to kind of ask you again, like, where do you think is the line where it's suddenly okay, no longer someone that's very mentally unwell to, and that's still an understatement, to someone that is demonically possessed, in your opinion?
Well, I guess in my opinion, I mean, I'm looking at it through the lens of an investigator. So if I'm investigating a case and we're there to see certain things, for instance, when we were investigating the house, Sheila Jackson's house, Danny Rowling's childhood home, hearing knocks of threes, uh, that very pungent, foul smell that would come and go, and seeing, well, and even certain things that we were receiving through our devices, through the geoport, through the spirit box, demon, Satan, many different things. And I know that there can be, kind of nasty human spirits that will sometimes communicate this way to scare you, and it might not actually be what that is. But when you kind of compile all of that together, it did certainly seem to us that something demonic was in that house.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, talk a little bit about that, about the home. You do visit the childhood home of Rowling.
yeah,
Talk a little bit more about the residents who lived there and what they said that they were experiencing.
sure. So all roads had led us to Rowling's childhood home. So we left Gainesville, Florida, went to Shreveport, and we went to meet with Sheila Jackson. At the time, we really weren't sure, would she interview with us? Would we be allowed in the house? Where would that go? Upon meeting her, it was pretty shocking to find out right away. She let us know that her home is haunted, that they're dealing with physical attacks. She would state that they would be attacked 2 to 3 times a week, that they would be injured, pinched. Sometimes it felt like they were being choked, being held down in bed. Poltergeist type activity, she would describe dishes being thrown, objects being thrown, voices, a whole gamut of different things. Also, one thing that is very noteworthy is I asked her, when you first bought this home, was there activity right away? She said no. She'd lived there for some years with absolutely no activity. Then I asked her, when did this activity begin? Do you recall? And she said, right around Thanksgiving of 2006. Well, Danny was executed in October of 2006. So that kind of gave me a little chill up the spine, so to speak, because right away you have to wonder, could it really be the spirit of Danny back at the house? I didn't want to go into it right away thinking, okay, well, this is Rawling's childhood home. It's haunted, so therefore it must be Danny. Because, as we all know, there could be many reasons why the house does have activity. Could have been something maybe they brought in, some kind of an attachment. But all signs pretty much pointed right away, potentially it would be Danny Rowling.
And certainly, I'm not asking this to question the credibility of the homeowner, but you know, why believe her? Because look, if a camera crew comes up to your house and says, "Hey, we're from a TV show and, we want to get in there and film, and, maybe we'll put you up in a hotel for a night or whatever."
Right.
Why believe these folks?
Well, I mean, after doing this for a long time, I think you get a real, you kind of have that sense, right? When you're interviewing somebody, talking to somebody. I mean, that of course that's one part of it, but I believed her to be very truthful. She didn't care about the cameras at all. In fact, at one point she just asked, could I just not be on camera and just tell you guys what's happening? And I don't care if you film here or not. I just want you to get rid of it. And that's what she would say over and over again. And at one point, when we asked her, would you guys, could we put you guys up somewhere so we can film? They were willing to stay there. They didn't really want to leave the house. And we kind of told them, well, that number one, that probably wouldn't be too safe. For many different reasons, it would be better if you weren't here while we were doing this. She didn't seem to want the attention at all. And to be honest with you, just having met her and spent that time with her, I would bet almost anything that she doesn't even know the title of this documentary, where to find it, or will probably even watch it. She just wanted it to be taken care of.
Hmm. Something you guys do talk about a little bit. It comes up, I think, twice in the documentary. Is why would someone stay in a home when they feel something is so aggressively attacking them? And I'll have you answer that. I think it's it's worth addressing.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, that was one of the first, well, I shouldn't say one of the first, but once she led me to the master bedroom and told me about the physical attacks and how frequent they were, I just remember looking right over at her and asking her, why are you still here? Why haven't you guys left? And she replied very swiftly and very passionately, I guess you could say, we can't afford it. And that's a very real answer. I mean,
Mhm.
sometimes, people get locked into a situation where they, maybe they don't have the credit at the time, they don't have a down payment. There's a lot of factors, and I certainly believed when she said that if she would have had the option, I think they would have left. I really do. And you can also look around her house and see where her faith is. You can see, she's very religious. She prays often. She even prayed for us while we were there. I saw her doing it. She didn't really say that's what she was doing, but I think she was trying to protect us in some way. And I just kind of think that, she thought she could get through it somehow, some way.
Yeah, and I think that even goes to, why would you keep certain things in the home,
Right.
such as curtains, if you knew that they belonged to someone else? I think that it's and you come into a place, depending on what your financial situation is like, if that set of curtains works just fine, you're not automatically going to a haunted situation. You're thinking that works just fine, and that's another couple bucks that I don't have to spend on this house.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're talking about the curtains. I mean, I'll never forget as well when I'm standing in the kitchen talking to her, and she said, "Well, this is where Danny shot his father." She just kind of very casually points up and says, "Well, there's the bullet hole right there." And plain as day, you can see the bullet hole right through the cabinet, and wasn't fixed, wasn't covered up. I think if it were my place, I may even just put a little sticker over it, something. But there it was. How many years later?
How many people were living in this home at this point?
At that point, there were three, and then she also had grandchildren that would come and go. And at one point, she was even operating a daycare out of there. And she would say that the kids would always run up and point and say, ghost, ghost, and were afraid and would see this man that they would talk about.
Were you afraid? I mean, when you during this investigation, it's kind of exploring the background a little bit of this man who killed 8 people, and then it becomes very much more I don't want to say real because it's always been real, but very much in the present when you're now in the home of
Yeah.
someone else. Do you feel, you know not just a responsibility, but a little bit concerned about going into someone's home when you actually believe you might be on some sort of demonic case? You're going into someone's home.
Yeah.
That's a little bit dicey, don't you think?
It is. Yeah, it is for sure. On many different levels, right? So many things are going through your head. You have concern about yourself, uh, your crew, your investigative partner, and I think all collectively, at least I'm sure with Cindy and I, we're also thinking we have to bring some resolve here. We're going into the situation. We're asking a bunch of questions. We're not going in there necessarily provoking, but I just think that simply us being there and asking questions and doing the things that we're doing would heighten the activity. If there's nothing we can do about it other than investigate it and classify it and say it is, well, Sheila and her family have to come home. So that yeah.
Yeah, I mean, picking up on that. I mean, as far as this notion of demons, do you think that investigators can really make the activity worse if they go in guns blazing thinking they're gonna fight some demons? Do you think they can make the activity worse, or even, you know potentially, according to theory, law of acknowledgement and whatnot, draw in activity that may not have already been there?
Yes. Yeah. I believe that, depending on what the individuals do, that's certainly a possibility. If you go in there and you begin confronting heavily, you start challenging, I certainly think it could get worse.
So how did you tread carefully in this situation?
Well, number one for me, again, not challenging, not making certain statements that could either have this force want to retaliate against me or anybody else. But basically, just continuing to ask questions, monitoring the devices, trying to see what kind of responses we were getting, what type of personal experiences that we were having, and also in this case, largely relying on Cindy's gift to tell me what she's seeing, what she's thinking, and kind of using those two things in tandem to create what we think is really happening, to create that final theory.
I'm curious for you to talk a little bit about Cindy presents herself as a evidential medium, and she's not here to talk a little bit about that. But I am curious about the investigative tactics that you choose to approach when dealing with a medium, and how you can verify, corroborate what she's picking up on.
Sure. Yeah. So working in tandem with the medium it's a lot of fun. I say fun. It's not like we're going to these very fun places, but
Right.
it's great in the sense that I kind of always say, for me, I'm all about using my gear. That's what I'm relying on: audio, video, obviously different things that measure different fields, but also the data, interviews, getting as much information as possible. Now, when I work with Cindy, I have to be very careful what I talk about. She doesn't want to know. She likes to be kept in the dark as much as possible, within the reason and the context of what we're doing. Now, when I'm working with her, one thing that to me, I never really, it doesn't ever get old to me, is if we're working together and she'll just kind of stop mid sentence and she'll say, "It's in the living room." In fact, that's what she did during this investigation. Well, we start to kind of head that way. Now the meters that are out there start going off, shortly after she says it. Pull out the SLS. Now we're catching an anomaly. Now we're experiencing temperature fluctuation. So I think it's great that when she's sensing something and can even pinpoint where it is in the room, and then the gear is corroborating what she's saying, either at the exact same time or seconds before or after, to me, that's just incredible. And I think that, that's the great synergy that you can have as an investigator while working with a medium. It's such an asset.
At the end of the day, what do you think that you ultimately encountered? Was it do you believe the ghost of this serial killer, or do you think there was a demonic presence, or multiple, all of the above?
I would like to say all the above. I don't know for absolute certain whether or not it was just Danny as a human spirit communicating with us at certain times, or if it was a demonic situation that was portraying itself as Danny. And I think that Cindy kind of suffered from the same thing as well, because she was being the manipulation was so intense, and she kept saying that over and over throughout the investigation, that she'd never experienced something like this before. There were times where I felt, yes, we were encountering a human spirit, but then seconds later, where the whole house is kind of rumbling, we're hearing this banging on the ceiling, and it sounds like something is dragging. All the meters start going off at one time, and then words are flying through the ovulus and the geoport that are all very blasphemous things. Not everything was shown. There were some things that were a little too dark, and I think that's probably why some of that stuff didn't make it in there. So I mean, certainly I know there was something demonic there. Whether or not something was trying to fool us, making us think that Danny was there as well in the house itself, that I don't know.
I'm gonna just bring up this question from the Ghost Maidens. You kind of addressed it a little bit, but the what if you are causing it together? And I think they're referring to the activity and the demonic, elements of, you kind of spoke to that, but can you give us a little bit more on your thoughts on that?
Okay, now in what context, as far as causing it together?
I mean, I think and the way I'm interpreting this as, can you be creating the activity? Can you be drawing it in?
I guess you're basically saying, could we have been summoning these things by?
Yeah.
I don't believe that we were summoning anything in the house by conducting the investigation, because Sheila was already having
Right.
all this activity that was very similar to what we were experiencing in the house. Now, you know, if she were to have just had some knocks and some maybe some footsteps and things that just weren't quite right, and we had gone in there and it went to a whole different level, then I would consider the possibility that our investigation could have maybe stirred up something, you know, beyond what was happening. But I feel that what was happening to Sheila is on the same level of as what was happening when we went in there. So I don't think so.
During an investigation like this, where there's such intensity, and again, we're not dealing with like, you know, I don't want to say standard haunted house, but you know, kind of let's say less extreme environments. During something like this, do you have your oh shit moment where you're like, have we gone too far on this? Have we opened up a can of worms that we cannot contain?
I mean, I think that there's sometimes I think sometimes that thought does cross your mind, of course, you know, but for me, it's more, you know, a sense where you get involved in a case because it's happened to me before where you get involved in a case that, you know, there's validity, there's credence there, you know, for certain that there is a haunting. And you hear the stories and you do the interviews, and your mind says, okay, yeah, they're saying it's this. It was Bob who was murdered here 20 years ago, and that so that makes sense. And here are all the stories. And then you get halfway into the investigation, and things that are happening don't add up with the story and seem a lot more extreme. Then you're really wondering, well, what did I just step into? Because sometimes you think you know exactly what you're dealing with, but you know, sometimes you can be unpleasantly surprised.
Yeah, for sure. And also, I mean, I guess the element of if you go into someone's house and you start, you know, exploring this, you are now you kind of you kind of in it like you know you're in it like
Yeah,
it's not so easy to just back off after you've gone in, right?
yeah, you're part of it now.
Yeah. Do you you don't really present yourself as a sensitive, correct?
Well, I mean, I guess all I can really say to that is I feel that if you do something long enough, you naturally develop some senses, you know, as with anything. And I feel that, you know, when somebody does something for so long, I do think to some degree, uh, you have a heightened awareness or a sensitivity to things. You know, but that's about all I could really say.
Sure, sure. I mean, sort of like, you know, the more you're kind of trying to tune in the dial on the radio, you know, you might eventually kind of tune in really well,
Right,
or in a better way.
right, right. Yeah.
Well, I guess that was a lead up to, do you find yourself, because this is not the first time you've investigated with Cindy and you're in these very intense situations, do you find yourself kind of tuning into Cindy and picking up on, you know, what she's throwing down, almost like developing a bit of a connection, maybe even a psychic connection as you're investigating?
You know, one thing about Cindy that I'll say that was really interesting for me upon first meeting her is doing the Ed Gein investigation. That was our first time working together, and I would say probably within 15 minutes, it almost felt like I had known her a really long time. You know, and that happens in life, right? It's kind of rare, but you meet somebody that you're totally comfortable with, and it's almost like you have a synergy that's already there. And so, I mean, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's just kind of a vibe that I have with her. And I feel that the more that I work with her, and I guess this kind of goes back to what I was saying a few moments ago, where it's the more you do something, or maybe the more that you're around somebody, you can kind of pick up on what they're going through even before they say it. So at first with Cindy, it was, yes, the synergy was there, but I wouldn't quite know when she was perceiving something because you know Cindy's really good at holding her cards. There'll be times where it just could look like maybe she's in thought, or maybe she's just observing something, but she's actually picking up on something. Now I'm able to tell when these things are happening even before she says it. I think just from the hours spent with her.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll say as a viewer, there are these moments during these sort of the sensory deprivation sessions that are shocking. I mean, it is a shock doc, so I guess that's appropriate, but shocking moments Um, what was one of those moments where you were thinking, okay, th- this is happening?
Well, as I'm walking around the house and Cindy's in, I just referred to it as the sewing room because, Mrs. Jackson had a sewing machine and whatnot. And she was in there and blindfolded, and she had headphones on that would block out the sound. I had an IFB in my ear, and I'm just kind of continuing my investigation. And the thought would be just let anything that comes to her mind come to her mind. She can relay that to me, and I can hear it. Well, a few minutes into the investigation, Cindy's pretty quiet. She's not really saying much. She's tuning in. She's kind of stating a few things. But then all of a sudden, she's telling me where to go, but she's not telling me where to go. Something else is channeling through her. I'm in the living room. You want to come see me? Come find me here. Meters are going off in that direction. Right away you're starting to kind of get that feeling of, okay, wait a minute, what's going on here? And one of those moments to me is I was in the bedroom where I had found the blood on the curtain, and I had saw something in the window. It came up to the window and then it kind of, went by. And right basically at the exact same time, Cindy's telling me I'm in the window. I'm watching you. That caused me to go outside right away, start looking around. Needless to say, I didn't see anything out there. But then it kind of dawned on me, and that was kind of one of those moments that hit you. Wait a minute, was this a ploy? Did this thing want me to go out of the house? And I say Cindy's in there by herself. I mean, obviously there's a camera person there, but those camera people are just there to document. They're just there to do that. What would they do if something started happening to her? How would they know what to do or what to look for? So right away, I knew it was time to end it at that point. But that was one of those moments.
Yeah, and it's a really eerie session, especially because she she says she's picking up on these things, and it seems like she's communicating very long sentences, not just one word, two words, but very or complete sentences.
Right.
The figure at the window, I mean, it does fit within the very disturbing history of this killer who early on was caught looking through windows at people that were undressing, and so there is that very kind of creepy precedent there.
That voyeurism, yeah. And again, of course, having to take all this investigation and condense it down, that session went much longer than what was actually seen, and at some points much darker than what was actually shown.
I was kind of surprised. I mean, do you feel like at any point you expected one of these victims to come through, because this is an investigation very much focused around the killer, and this is a sensitive line to go down, but do you feel like you were at any point communicating with one of these 8 victims?
Me personally, no, I don't think so. Nothing I received as far as an EVP or anything through Spirit Box, Ovilus, Geoport, nothing made me believe that that was the case. Which, certainly I could understand why, that would be a theory. I mean, it did happen to us during the Gein investigation. We really believe that, well, Cindy knows that victims were coming forward to her, and there were also corroborating evidence, for me believing that that was happening, but not on this case.
Right. I, I'm curious. When we go down the path of doing a paranormal investigation involving a serial killer and talking about a serial killer who claimed to be possessed, how do we pursue this while also avoiding letting this human off the hook for
Right.
such brutal acts?
Absolutely. Excellent question. I completely agree with what you're saying there. Me personally, I say me personally, but of course Cindy as well. All of us, on behalf of all of us, none of us ever gave an excuse to what Danny did at all. In fact, even at the very end of the documentary, I make it clear that if we inadvertently set his spirit free through the minor rite of exorcism, let him go face the judgment that he deserves. But we were going in there to investigate: is there a paranormal element to this case, and then to investigate Sheila's house. I don't personally, I'm speaking just for myself. I don't believe that everything Danny did is based on demonic oppression or possession. I think that if anything, this came about through his actions. I mean, sure, it definitely could be a generational thing. There's a lot of evidence that could suggest that. But if that wasn't the case, I believe his actions and his horrible deeds is what allowed him to kind of be overtaken by something of this nature. So I
Yeah.
don't let Danny off the hook for what he did.
We have a question here from the audience. Was there a moment, or what moment during this investigation was the closest you came to panicking or a feeling of pure fear? I mean, Steve's a tough guy. I know he's done this a lot, and a established investigator, but still, that question.
Yeah. One thing about me, I hear a lot of it in the comments sometimes, and I guess it kind of makes me laugh a little bit because some people will say, "Why are you always so calm?" And I don't know if maybe people expect me to be different for some reason, but it's not that I go into these cases thinking that I'm a tough guy and nothing's going to scare me, but I just kind of feel that, which is very hard, right? Because we're human. So, but trying to remove emotion during an investigation for me is kind of an asset because I feel that if you can try to be objective, which again is almost impossible to some degree, right? Because we all have a predisposition bias of some sort of something or a belief system or a religion or whatever it may be. But trying to remain calm and not being frazzled or having a spirit get a rise out of you and just kind of really paying attention to what is really happening. Because again, like I brought up earlier, I've worked on cases where people really believe that they had a demonic being in their house, and they would tell me why, and I would go there, and if I went in there with that in my mind, I think that that would alter my lens, and I would be seeing things that were happening to be maybe a little bit more demonic, if you will, than what they really are. So I just try to keep an even keel, but certainly, again, being a person, there's going to be times where you're startled, where you pick up on something, or you realize that maybe you're in over your head to some degree. Did that happen on this case? Certainly. I don't claim to be a demonologist. I'm not a jack of all trades in that sense. I didn't want to challenge this thing or try to command it to go without having the proper recourse and everything kind of all set up. But yeah, in this case, seeing how disturbed Cindy was rattled me a little bit for sure. She's a seasoned pro. She's done this for so long. I've never seen her respond that way, and so that was unsettling.
And I'm gonna just bring up this question since I was the one that asked it. Do you have to be a tough guy to hunt ghosts? I reference tough guy. I use that phrase. No, you don't. I'm gonna speak to that one. That was my poorly articulated phrase, but I think what Steve's trying to say is just when you're pursuing this in a certain way after a certain amount of time, you just have a certain I keep saying certain, but you have a almost a sobriety about it as you go into a location that you're not jumping right to the freakiness of it.
Yeah,
Would that be? Yeah.
yeah,
Do you, with that, I do want to, well, for as far as demonologist, let's face it. I mean, this is not really a licensed practice. It's not like demonologist, cardiologist. So when you're looking for a demonologist, how are you determining that you're working with someone that knows what they're doing versus someone that just printed up business cards with demonologist on it? And that's not any slam against Michael Salerno, but just in general.
yeah. No, it's a very fair question. Michael came to me a while ago, heavily referenced by somebody that I know and trust, that's worked with Michael quite a bit. And I did a lot of my research about him. As a matter of fact, I had actually researched him even prior to that. And Michael remembered that when we first met. He said, kind of pulled me aside and said, "Hey, you reached out to me a few years ago. You needed my help at that time. I was taking a little bit of a break. He had dealt with some pretty hardcore cases and just kind of wanted to ease off a little bit. And I felt that there was only a few demonologists and not saying that there's not more, but that I had found in research that I, would use in a case, him being one of them. And I think his faith is strong. His heart's in the right place. He's very, very knowledgeable about the situation. He's, connected to the Warrens, worked with Lorraine Warren, a lot of other very credible people, and he really lives for this. For lack of a better word, he cares passionately. I can't tell you how many times I'll pick up my phone throughout, the weeks or the months, and then Michael's, "Hey, how are you doing? How is everything? Are you good? I saw you did this case. Do you need anything from me?" And the cameras aren't on him when this is happening. This is, him as a human being, really wanting to make sure that the people that he's around are good and okay, and checking in on them. So again, knowledge, experience, passion, faith, that type of thing. That's what makes me trust a guy like Michael, and that's what I would be looking for.
Yeah, and I'm not. I think that you mentioned the Warrens. They were involved, investigated the Arnie Cheyenne Jackson case, which then later became the basis for the Devil Made Me Do It Conjuring 3 movie.
Yeah.
And that Devil Made Me Do It was a defense argument, or that one that they tried to use. It ultimately was not allowed in court. But from your perspective, if Rowling was still alive and trying to appeal his death sentence, do you think attorneys should be able to bring this demon defense or bring this documentary into the courtroom as some sort of defense argument?
Well, I mean, regarding the documentary itself, to me, this, our experience took place after his death,
Right.
of course, but I'm just saying, I don't know what was happening when he was living. I just know what we were capturing, at his house, at his childhood home. But no, I don't. It's such a hard. It's a great question, and it's a hard one because I do believe that in this world, evil certainly exists, and I do believe that people can be possessed. But at the same time, how do you prove that? When you have a murderer or someone who does something heinous in court, how can you prove without a shadow of a doubt that that individual is possessed? Now, I believe that, with the right people and the right clergy and and a gamut of testing of every kind to possibly conclude that, I don't think the courts would ever recognize that. And I would also say, in my opinion, probably 99% of the time, whenever that's brought up as some reason for what happened, of course, I don't think it is. But do I think it's possible that, throughout human existence, somebody did something atrocious because of being under demonic influence? I do.
I think, you've produced and directed 10 documentaries. You've appeared in a lot of programs. I've done a lot of paranormal TV, and it is really it's a fact that there has been an escalation within paranormal reality TV to highlight demonic stories. And let's face it, I mean, it's sexy as far as the entertainment value goes, and I'm curious, do you think that there's an increasing amount of demonic cases? Do you think the focus on these cases is stirring up more activity? Are we artificially elevating the threat? I mean, just why do you think all of this is happening?
Sure. I see what you're saying 100% about, the attraction of a demonic case. But, one thing for me, as you'd mentioned, I do have my own documentary series, and
Mhm.
because I do, I have an open platform for people to contact me. I get contacted a lot by people wanting to tell me what's happening to them very frequently. And when I read these messages, and I think I had said this the other day, I was asked something fairly similar to this, but I have noticed in about the last 3 years, but really more so the last 2 years, year and a half, as I'm going through these messages, I'm seeing a lot more darker things and things that would seem potentially more of the demonic type activity than I would see previously. 5 years ago, if you were to ask me, how often do you come across a case that you believe could potentially be demonic. And I would probably say one or two out of 100 could potentially be based on, what I'm hearing and all of that. But now it almost seems like that's gone up about 20%. And this is, and we're not talking documentaries, we're not talking television, we're talking about correspondence from random people I don't know that is saying, hey, I would like to talk to you. I need to talk to somebody. This is what's happening in the house. And I don't
Yeah.
even necessarily know that they know the telltale signs of something demonic, but buried in those sometimes very extensive multiple paragraphs, you can kind of see those moments that kind of draw your eye and say, ooh, that's not a good one. Or somebody saying, I don't understand. You know, this isn't a farmhouse, but we're hearing pig sounds, and not to sound silly, but we're hearing moos and oinks and it sounds kind of ridiculous, and they don't understand it. But you talk to a demonologist and you say that, and right away they're that's a huge red flag. So, but it is strange that there does seem to be kind of an increase, and I don't know why. Is it because the world's going through such a change right now, and there's a heightened fear and anxiety, and what comes with fear and anxiety? Sadly, we see suicide rates are up, we see substance abuses through the roof, and unfortunately, those can be little cracks and gateways for negatives to get in.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't think Steve is the person that's saying every case is a demonic case. In fact, he just said the
No,
opposite. I will say, in the horrific nature of this case, it could be just a monstrous human, but man, it's not a really hard sell to say that it was, or to view this as something, beyond. Um, do you think that you ultimately helped Sheila Jackson, the owner of this home?
I do. And in fact, as you said that, I kind of took a little sigh right there of relief, because I remember getting that voicemail. There's a voicemail that plays at the end of the documentary. And when I heard that voicemail, um, I know maybe it sounds corny, maybe it doesn't, but I remember smiling just listening to it, because when I met her, you could see the stress, that was on her. You could see it in her face, you could hear it in her voice. Um, the house was so dim and dark. I mean, and I mean, kind of in an abstract sense and in a literal sense. You could just tell what they were going through. And then when I heard that voicemail that he's gone, she kept saying he, thinking, it must have been Danny that was there, and nothing has happened since. I try to reach out to her ever since then. Nothing has happened thus far. Doesn't mean that something can't come back. I personally feel that even when an exorcism is performed or a ceremony, I always think it's probable it could come back, but thus far it has helped her, which is great.
And just a question to that: have you had any experiences since leaving? And did you do a cleanse before you left? And what kind of thing did you do?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I kind of, have a different approach with that. Me personally, I feel that a lot of it is kind of what's inside you. How strong you are as an individual in your mind and your heart, how you perceive things, where you stand. And at the same time, when I do come home, I do have some private individuals that I can go to and kind of take care of things in my own way.
How do you think that this shock doc, Scream the True Story, how do you think this and the investigation alters the legacy, the very dark legacy of these crimes? And what would you like the audience takeaway from this shock doc to be?
Sure. Um, if I believe that we've altered the legacy at all, if we have in any way, I think that what we did was from obviously a paranormal standpoint, we went in to investigate the claims that the police would not investigate, and to see, is there any credence to this? Are these locations really affected by the spirit of Danny or whatever had overtaken Danny? We obviously definitively believe, yes, we did encounter that. Do I believe that Danny wasn't responsible for his actions personally? No, I don't. I can't make that call. So I don't think we altered anything in that sense. we wanted to tread very lightly. I went out of my way to not talk about the victims as much as possible, having no desire to exploit that situation whatsoever. It was more focused on Danny Rowling. Was he or was he not influenced by malevolent entities or a demonic?
Mm-hmm. Now, as far as you, Steve Shippy, where do you go from here? What do you have coming up that we can keep an eye out for?
Sure. There's a lot I wish I, could say right now, but Cindy and I will definitely be continuing to work together. I have a new film of my own independently coming out. The 11th would have been the 13th. Had COVID not have wreaked havoc on the world, because we always launch our independent release with a big premiere, and that we do that first before it goes off the streaming. But anyway, we'll be coming out with my 11th film there, and just continuing to do what I do. And yeah.
Okay. And Steve, how can people keep up with what you're doing? Look out for announcements and updates, and just generally follow you.
Yeah, sure. Well, for my independent films, which is kind of under the umbrella Haunted Saginaw, they can stream those on Amazon Prime. I definitely have a home at Discovery Plus, so that would be a great way to keep up on what I'm doing. And social medias, you could just simply look up my name, find me, and friend me, shoot me a message, or whatever you'd like to do.
Right on. And Steve, I really appreciate you joining me for this talk and really taking these questions, sometimes a little bit difficult questions, which you handled masterfully. I appreciate you answering all of them and being here for this. And I'm going to ask you to hang out backstage after I let you go, and we'll chat in a second. But Scream, The True Story is currently airing on Discovery Plus, a shock doc with Steve Shippy and Cindy Kaza, and it is a watch. It's intense, and this gentleman right here is on the forefront of it. So, Steve, thank you so much for your time, my friend.
Thank you.
And guys, I am still here, and I'm going to thank you for joining in. And look, you can follow me at Aaron Sagers across social media, Instagram, Twitter, give me a shout on Facebook, all those good places. And also, I'm going to ask you to keep an eye out for more of this kind of content. We are calling this officially Talking Strange, and it is the Talking Strange programming with Den of Geek, and we have more talks on the way. So wherever you are, stay spooky and keep it weird.